Reggie here, your friendly neighborhood bodybuilder and comic book collector, and I want to welcome you to my live stream. In this live stream, I hope to be able to accomplish two things. I want to spend a little bit of time showing you guys some of the books that are going to be given away as part of this week's trivia night that is taking place on Sunday around 7:30 Pacific time. And then the second thing we're going to do is to play a game of what if. I've been talking a lot about the state and the health of the comic book market over the last several videos that I've been releasing. And I've been having some discussions with a couple of people. One guy in particular, a guy by the name of Ryan, who reached out to me based upon one of the videos that I released, and he and I started having a back and forth around what would it look like if the comic book market crashed. And that just got all kinds of thoughts swirling in my mind. And I reached out to several people over the course of today to kind of ask their opinions, and their thinking was very similar to mine. And I'm like, you know what? Maybe I should do it as a video. And I thought, you know what? Forget it. We're going to roll the dice. We're going to go live, and we're just going to have a live discussion about this thing. So it should be interesting. This video is going to be a mixture of like things I believe to be true and just stuff I'm gonna make up. So we're gonna see how much fun / trouble we can get into. But with all of this stuff, whether it be a pre-recorded video or the live stream, the whole thing is just to kind of have some fun, have a discussion, have a debate. The goal is to keep it positive, to keep it constructive, and just to have a little bit of back and forth. So I want to see who's in the chat, and then we're going to get started with the books that are going to be given away as trivia night, and then we're going to jump into this what if scenario. So White Whale is here. How you doing, brother? Welcome to the chat. Matt is in the house. How you doing, Matt? Comic Head 84 is here. SWP Goat 99 is in the house. RB3 says, don't make stuff up. Brother, we are going to speculate like nobody's business. Hopefully you guys can see me. I got a new light set up here. I'm not quite sure if I like it, but we're playing around with some new lights, and we'll see how this works out. Kingpin Comics is here. Brother, I saw your message earlier today about that. I didn't read the whole thing, but I kind of scanned it on my phone about the Thor book that I mistakenly bought as you were trying to comfort me. Andrea is here. How you doing, Andrea? Welcome to the chat. Thank you for your offer to help me the other day. And that video, I'm working on it in the background, and I may need your help at some point for the follow-up video. Simon Comics is here. Oh my God, Fro, I guess that's it. OMG, Fro, how you doing, brother? Jay Littles is in the house. Drop one of those G's. Jay Little, it's R-E-G-I-E. Just playing. No, it is R-E-G-I-E. Julia's in the house. Jason is here. A lot of you guys are here. This is awesome. It's awesome to see you guys. And it's really cool because I think there are at least 2 women in the chat. My statistics for females is going up. I think I'm almost at like 5% of my subscribers are women. So it is cool to see you guys here. G Murray in the house. Mark Spencer is here. It is good to see you guys. Exactly. Go comic ladies. I was talking to somebody the other day that made a comment about the fact that they don't see as many young people in comic shops anymore. And part of my thinking was that, yeah, that's because comic shops aren't necessarily located near schools like they used to be. But I also made the comment that I actually see a lot more women involved in comics, like whether it be doing things on YouTube or in comic shops. And I think it's wonderful. I really do. That was one of the things that caught me off guard when I went to a comic shop after returning to comics. I was in the shop, and there were a couple of women in there buying comics, and they were buying them for themselves. And it was interesting. It was interesting. It's definitely a change, and I think it's a very, very good change. Comic Head 84, how you doing? Leave it at Reggie's video to get me sleepy and Brother, when I get on here, I like to turn it up. Julia says there was a study done and women are the biggest growing market in comics right now. I absolutely believe it. Which is part of the reason why Marvel is probably gearing more things towards women, which I think is great. It's because they're probably reading the exact same study that you're referring to. So I think that's a very good thing. And Los, you are correct. This hobby has evolved and I think it will continue to evolve. And I think those are all wonderful things. So the first thing I wanted to do, now that I've welcomed you guys to the chat, is I want to show you guys some of the books that are going to be given away as part of Trivia Night, which is happening on Sunday, this Sunday around 7:30. I'm hoping that you guys can join me. This Trivia Night is being sponsored by Uncle. So if you haven't watched the videos that I've released, go back and watch the videos. I've had an opportunity to dip into a 400 long box collection, and I've called it the Uncle Collection. And so the family that owns the collection has generously donated enough books for me to give away as part of an entire trivia night. So every book that you're going to see has been donated by the family, and the idea is that they wanted to give something back to the community through me. So all the books you're going to be seeing are going to be given away as part of this trivia night, which again is happening this coming Sunday at 7:30 or 7:30-ish. So my light is in a slightly different place this time, so I'm going to try to work around the glare. But it's my understanding that all of these books are pretty nice books. Here's a pretty slick Catwoman book that I think is awesome. We have some amazing Spider-Man books here, some Watchmen. What I'll probably end up doing is, I know I'm showing these books relatively fast. You can always go back and watch it on the replay, but I'm also going to try to post it to my Instagram tomorrow, Regie Collects, so you can always check these books out in detail. And the way that this thing is going to go is that all of these books will be numbered. And what you'll do as part of the trivia night is, if you answer a question correctly, you will have an opportunity to pick some books. And I may mix it up a little bit more because these books are worth a little bit. Instead of allowing people to pick 2 books, we may have to pick one. I needed to think a little bit more about that. I want to try to make it as fair as possible so that everyone has an opportunity to get some of these awesome books that the family has donated. So these are essentially all the books that are going to be given away as part of Trivia Night. So my hope is that you guys will be able to join me. I'm also going to throw this one in there. This is a book that I used in my my comic book war game that I do with Thanatos that I lost in. So, but again, what if the market crashes came from this idea of what if, or that book, I should say. So DS Comics says ROM #1 is a cool book. Yes, it is. I actually set this thing up. So hopefully you guys can set a reminder, because I put it out there earlier today. So you guys should be able to set that up. Simon Comics says do some trivia about Golden Age. So the way that it works, Simon, is that typically what I do is that the questions that I ask as part of Trivia Night are based upon the videos that I release in the week or so leading up to Trivia Night, and then some of them are derived from the videos that I release, and then some are general comic book knowledge. And so the thing about Golden Age, as you know, is that that's a specialized kind of thing. There aren't a whole lot of comic book collectors that know a lot about Golden Age. So I want to make sure that I make it fair for everyone. So as always, I will have a blend of topics and a blend of trivia coming from the various publishers. So the goal is to make it fair and fun for everyone. So Steve Rogers, how you doing? Welcome to the chat. Gabrielle Flores, or Gabriel Flores, sorry about that. Joseph is here. How you doing? Just scored an Immortal Hulk #2 for cover price. Congratulations on that. All right, market crashes. All right, so the next thing that I wanted to get into is, hopefully you guys have watched the videos that I've been releasing where I'm talking about scarcity and rarity, the difference between a 9.8 and 9.6, talking about the differences between the 90s comic book market and the current market, and just what the overall health of the comic book market is. So I wanted to kind of jump into this thing a little bit with maybe an assumption that you guys have checked out some of those videos. And again, I want to give a huge shout out to Ryan. Ryan reached out to me a couple of days ago after having watched all my videos, and we had this back and forth that's been going on for like 2.5 days about some of this stuff, which is part of what's prompting me to do this this thing now. So the way that I was kind of thinking about it is I am making the assumption that we are in somewhat of a stable market, right? And a stable market as opposed to what was happening in the 90s, where you had, 43 million comics that were printed in 1 month versus 8 million that are printed in a month now, right? So I'm basically saying we are in a stable market. And so as I thought about that, what makes a stable market crash? Oftentimes there has to be, at least in my mind, some kind of systemic, widespread problem, right? Some extinction level stuff has to happen for a stable market to crash. Or you have to have a lot of these little things that happen, kind of what happens in the comic book market back in the 90s. A lot of little things, or even the housing market for that matter, a lot of little things that all kind of line up perfectly for the dominoes to tip and then them to just keep falling. So I'm making the assumption again that we are in a stable market and that some kind of extinction level event has happened. And I don't necessarily think that that's going to happen, at least fingers crossed that it doesn't. But let's just say that it does. Let's say that this extinction level event is about to occur. And one of the first things that I kind of started, saturation, very good, Kingpin Comics, that would be one. Oversaturation is something that could erode a very, very stable market, right? Like 43 million comics coming into a market when there aren't that many collectors in the world, right? That is speculation, not by collectors, but that is speculation by the person walking down the street that just decides to go buy 20 copies of Spawn #1 because they heard that you can be rich off of comics, right? But yes, that is it. Digital JD is a very, very small part of what's happening in the market right now. I think it's a really small portion. That doesn't mean that it's going to stay that way, but I hear you, and I have some thoughts about digital as well. But let's say that this extinction level event is imminent. It is about to happen. The question that I have for you guys, this is the first question. Would we see it coming? Right? Would we see it coming? And I say that because if you look at the stock market, you can actually watch the crash happen. You can watch the crash happen in real time. Why? Because there are millions of financial transactions that happen every minute, every hour, tons of them. And you can literally watch the price of a stock, multiple stocks, the entire stock exchange fall second by second by second. You can't do that with comics, right? You can't, there is no ticker for comic books. There is no market that monitors the selling of comics the same way that you do with the NASDAQ. So the question is, would we see it coming? So got a couple of people here. Regan just got to the chat. How you doing? So the question is, would we even see the crash coming? Hey, Tony, how you doing? You haven't missed much, Brett. Not much at all. So G. Murray says that he thinks that most collectors will see it coming. And my question is how? How would we see it coming? Because and I'm not trying to put G on the spot. That's not what I'm doing here, right? But the thing is, you only know that, in my opinion, that a crash has happened or that things are going bad to some degree if prices are slipping, which means that you are looking in hindsight. You're looking in hindsight at whatever the lag is between the sale on eBay or Heritage and when it gets loaded to Go Collect or GPA. You're looking at sales data in hindsight. You are not looking at it in real time, right? So that's one of the challenges. Is yes, social media does spread news fast, but what news would they spread? What news would be spreading that would let you know that the market is crashing right this moment? What would that news be? I'm struggling. Exactly. I don't know that you could see it coming. You could see it, right, by looking and analyzing the data from sales that happened yesterday, right? But I don't know that you can see it in real time as it actually happens. Except, as I thought about this, there may be some leading indicators that will signal that a crash is coming, right? And the leading indicator in my mind, I'm trying to think through this. The leading indicator that I could see would be a reduction in the comic book orders that are being placed by LCSs. Right? You can see the demand for the books slowing. Now that demand could be because fewer people they have pull lists, or they've stopped their pull list, or they're not picking up their books, or the LCSs are going out of business. But somehow or another, as a leading indicator, you will see the sales start to go down, right? That are going in Diamond and of course coming out of Diamond. That's the one thing that I could kind of see happening to be a leading indicator for what is actually going to happen. And you would have to be monitoring that to see it. And it may have to be a substantial decrease, because remember, not all comics sold go through Diamond or go through LCSs. There's some other channels that are out there. So you would have to be able to monitor that on a regular basis to see that it's happening, to anticipate what's coming. Now, some might say that LCS's closing would be a leading indicator. And that's true. But how would you get that data? Because that's the thing that I struggle with is I only know anecdotally that comic shops are closing. I haven't seen any data that says that the comic shop in North Dakota has closed, right? So that was one that I thought could be a leading indicator if you had the ability to get the data, but I don't know that you do. So my only thought about what could be a leading indicator to tell me what's coming would be the orders that are being placed. So somebody saying here it's about supply and demand, which is very true. Demand is high, which is very true. John's Comics for Kids is reading New Avengers from 2002-3. That's a very good series. Welcome to the chat, brother. Century 1 is also solid. Tracy's best says he gets his news from me, so he's looking to me. Whitewell Comics says Disney is liquidating the comics division at Marvel. Is that true or is that speculation? So Gabe is saying market downturn, future sales drops to Diamond from shops, or downturn in sales is different from seller channels. I think that's a very interesting thought. And so, yeah, so you got again, the only leading indicator that I see right now is going to be if new comic books slow down. Now here's the point that I just saw someone saying there. Shops can no longer rely on free comic book day as their ploy to attract new customers. Very well said. The other thing that I've kind of realized is, and you guys correct me on this, I think that there are essentially like three markets that exist for comics. And there may be three markets that exist for most things. I would have to think more about it. There is like the new comic book market. And that is essentially where the publisher is making their book, they are selling it to Diamond or whatever, and Diamond is distributing it. That is the current market. There is the secondary market, where like the back issues exist, where the silver, bronze, age books are being moved back and forth on eBay and Heritage and small dealers in between us and this community, right? That's another market. And then there's like a discount market, right? Like I think it was Ali or something like that, where they, offloaded all these, hardcover books to them to sell at like steep discounts, right? $50 hardcover books going for $7. So I almost think that there's like 3 markets. And to some degree or another, I don't know that all of those markets are connected. And here's where I'm going. Let's say that this crash has occurred, right? We didn't necessarily see it come because we weren't looking at new comics, right? Or the statistics around new comics. And the market crash happens. I don't know that the primary market collapsing will have a huge impact on the secondary market. And here's where I'm going. Fantastic Four #1, Hulk #1, Amazing Fantasy 15, those books are still going to be in demand. Still going to be in demand. And they may not, again, be connected to new comics, right? If the market crash happens, what I could see happening is Silver Age, Bronze Age, Golden Age books, even Copper Age books. What may happen is that the prices for some of those books may drop. They may drop a little bit, right? But the demand is still going to be there, right? And if I have a Hulk 181, for example, and I think that book is worth $5,000, and I put that book on the market and someone offers me $2,000 for it, would I sell it? Probably not. Not unless I absolutely needed the money. So more than likely, I would just hold the book, right? So has the price gone down? Maybe, maybe not, but I'm holding the book. So, you know, it still has some kind of intrinsic value in it, right? And I don't know if because the primary market collapses that my Hulk 181 or my Amazing Fantasy #15 suddenly become worthless, right? So some of these new books, right, which are cover price books, they may be worthless, right? Theoretically worthless. But some of the books that are on the wall behind me, I think still have value because they still have a fan base and there's still demand for those books. So let me get caught up here real quick. You guys are talking about a couple of different things. Kyle Simmons, how you doing, brother? Glad you made it to the stream here. Ultra says he'll wait until eBay has a $15 coupon. New books don't have a lot of good first appearances. Very well said. Tracy says, if the comic market is like others, it will bounce back. If you don't plan to sell your books, you don't really worry about the downturns. Quite honestly, since you're holding it, it'll bounce back. Well said right there. Reggie, Golden Age is the 4th market. I think you could be right about that. You could be right because that might be a different kind of dynamic all itself. Everything is worth what people are willing to pay. Even gold or diamonds are not worth anything. Very true. They do have there is some scarcity, fake scarcity built into that. But again, I think that you guys are making a couple of good points that if you have a book that you don't have to sell, more than likely people aren't going to sell those books unless they're encountering some kind of financial difficulties, unless they are using funds other than discretionary funds to buy their comics, like if they're buying them on credit or something like that. And I know that some people do that for whatever reason, and no judgment on my part. But unless someone has financial difficulties, I don't know why they would sell a major key at a massive discount just because the market has collapsed to the point that sooner or later the market will recover, right? The market almost always recovers. And if you look at what happened in the 90s, and I'm actually working on this video now, if you look at what happened in the 90s, did the market collapse? Yes, for new comics, but I don't know that the secondary market, right, or the 4th market for Golden Age, I don't know if those markets collapsed. I think those markets may have stalled in the sense that there were not as many sales. Maybe some of the inventory dried up because people were holding their books, but I don't know that sales for the secondary market books went away. I don't know that the prices just plummeted, right? Because if you look at the trajectory of many of these Silver Age books, many of these blue chip books, their values have increased over time. And again, I'm working on a video to kind of share some of that. So I just kind of focus on this idea that, everybody's saying the market is going to collapse. And yeah, the market might collapse, but that doesn't mean that the books behind me on the wall and the books that many of you have are suddenly going to become worthless. Maybe the books that are off to my left here in some of these short boxes are like my new Avengers, which I'm a huge fan of, right? Maybe those books will become worthless, but I don't know that these books behind me will suddenly become worthless just because the market collapses. And like everyone says, eventually the market will rebound. And so Comic Book Gallery is saying overprinting, right? Which is something that we talked about. Overprinting of a book is what kills the value. Absolutely. And that's what happened in the 90s, right? 43 million copies in 1 month that were being printed, right? Versus 8 million that are being printed now. And even though there's a ton of variance, or at least it seems that there's a ton of variance, I don't know that those two things are the same. To me, they look very different, but it's that oversaturation, the overprinting of comics that erodes some of the value. But again, I think that affects new comics more so than it does the secondary, or it's not the tertiary. What would be the fourth market? Because it would be secondary, tertiary, and quadary. I don't think that's a word, but you see, I think you guys get where I'm going with that. So I wrote myself a couple of notes here. I started thinking about like what would happen with the comic books themselves and like the trade paperbacks and things like that. I think that to some degree, like production quantities will be cut by the publishers. They'll probably be printing more. They're probably going to cut some titles, or so they could cut titles away, right? The underperforming titles, right? That aren't doing anything. Or they could do some crazy stuff and just start introducing all kinds of new titles, right? Because that could be the other side of it, is we're going to introduce all these titles. We're going to introduce all these new characters. We're going to try to, make it, we're going to have some gimmicky stuff to it, right? New titles, new characters, gimmicks, right? Foil stuff and tattoos and, all kinds of like crossover opportunities, right? Because that's what happened with like Dazzler. Wasn't Dazzler like a crossover with some disco stuff back in the day? I could see companies, if they see the market crashing because they make their money off of when new books are sold, basically flooding the market with a lot of cheap stuff, right? Gimmicky stuff, trying to stay afloat. And so that very well could happen. And I had a note here. I'm using this new term that I'm calling spinnerbait, right? They could have spinnerbait stuff, like your favorite character dies, but they don't really die, but they put it on the cover with some sensational language and a sensational cover to get you to pick it up off the spinner rack. So there could be a lot of that spinnerbait type stuff that actually happens. But there, again, because the publishers make their money not on the secondary markets or those other markets, they make it on that primary market, they could be trying to fight to stay alive. And Bueller brought this point up to me, and JD brought it up no one knocked disco. JD brought this point up a few moments ago, that digital could be important. And I didn't get it when Bueller mentioned it to me at first, but then I thought a little bit more about it. He gave me a little bit more detail. And digital, you could see that publishers like Marvel or DC or any of the others could start to leverage more of their digital services. And the reason for that is their production costs probably go down because they're using a digital platform, right? If the artists are drawing digitally and sending in scans, and those scans get inked and those get loaded into Marvel Unlimited, why print a bunch of paper? Why print a bunch of books? Everything is digital, right? Amazon's in the digital game as well, right? With comics. So why not just go completely digital? And not only do they get the sale of the new comic, right? That is now digital, but they get the residual membership as well, without all of the production costs, without having to give Diamond part of the price of the book for distributing the book, right? Everything is now digital. So I could see how a crash could happen, and how the publishers decide that they are going to leverage digital as a means to improve their profitability, cutting out the paper comics altogether. But even that, would that have an impact on the other markets? I don't know. So let me get caught up here on the chat here. You guys are talking about Jubilee and some Dazzler action here. So I don't think you can go wrong with either one of those people because I'm a big fan of both of those. Has Art Germ done a Dazzler cover? I don't think so, but I think that he could. I think that'd be a pretty cool. Reggie in Foil Vision, the future of, I lost that. I lost the chat. The future of YouTube with the lenticular variant for a premium rate. You guys are awesome. You guys are awesome. Double S Comic Reader, how you doing? Big Will, you are just a little bit late, brother. That's okay. We're sitting here talking about if a comic book market crashed, like what would happen? We're just playing this what if game. So Ultra 7 says if Marvel lost money, Disney wouldn't care. That's a very good point as well. Is that I think what happened like back in the 90s, and you guys that were around back then, correct me, Disney was going it alone, right? Disney had to fight to survive. I'm sorry, Marvel had to fight to survive. And now what I think you have is that Marvel has a big brother, and that big brother has some incredibly deep pockets, you know, and I think that Disney looks at Marvel as a small, very small piece of its business in terms of possibly revenue generation. But I think more importantly, they see a rich repository of stories. There is a rich repository of content that sits within Marvel. And sometimes companies are willing to take a loss on certain parts of their business because they make so much money or because the loss isn't really that meaningful. It gets rounded off in the zeros. So you could see Big Brother just continuing to put money into it because of the money that they make on the other side. Now, with that said, one can make the argument that because Disney is making these Marvel movies, they are actually introducing new readers to comics, right? The comics are, through the movies, I think are much more accessible to the average person now. I think that comic books are more mainstream than they were before. It's not as much of a subculture thing as it once was. Like someone could say, I collect comics and not be considered a nerd, right? I mean, there was that stigma that I had from back in the day, but I don't know that that stigma exists now. And if you look at it, if you're watching TV, if you're on YouTube, think about how many shows, and I know Daredevil was just canceled, but think about how many shows, how many dramas, how many cartoons are derived from comic books, whether it be DC or Marvel, right? You've got Supergirl, you've got Superman, you've got the whole, what is it, the WB, right? Black Lightning, Arrow, Flash. I mean, you've got Runaways, Gifted. I mean, the list goes on and on of all of these properties that are making money for these parent companies. And again, leveraging all of the content that is coming outside of the comic books. So G. Murray, I lost your comment there. It says, where'd it go? If anything, it's just my opinion, but I can see Marvel DC falling off to the independents only because of the better storytelling and the better stories for movies if people get tired of heroes. Just my opinion, but I can see Marvel and DC fall. I struggle with that one only because of the market dominance that those two companies have, right? When you look at it, like Marvel and DC, I want to say off the top of my head, have 60% of the market. Each one of them is kind of like around 30 and some change, and they kind of bounce back a little bit. But then you look at the third company down, and there's not a whole lot of market share there. There's not a whole lot of market share for those other small companies. And yeah, maybe they're telling better stories. I know that a lot of their books are being picked up and optioned and things like that. But we're going to have to see whether those options actually turn into movies and or TV shows, because I haven't seen that just yet. Not to say that you're wrong. I think that I need more data to be able to make a judgment call on that one. But you could be right. And I think that's also one of the, in my opinion, the other big differences between the 90s and now is that you look at the quality. Have you tried to read Spider-Man from the 90s? McFarlane Spider-Man from the 90s? It is not good. It is not good at all. The art's not good and the stories aren't that good. And, you know, part of why I think the things happened in the 90s is because the publishers were cranking out so many books that there weren't great quality books, right? Terror Inc. Have you guys tried Terror Inc., Dark Hawk, Sleepwalker? DS Comics and I were having this debate the other day. The quality of the books in the 90s just wasn't good versus, in my opinion, some of like what you're seeing now with like the Donny Cates stuff. I mean, his writing is pretty darn solid. I mean, even Bendis, I liked Bendis, right? So I think it's a little bit different. So Alex says my thoughts on Daredevil on Netflix. Netflix canceling Daredevil. I don't think that it's having a huge bearing, and here's my thought. I think that the Daredevil show, at least in my opinion, was probably pretty successful. I don't know that Netflix releases its data like through Nielsen, so I don't know that we have data to go on to see how popular it was or wasn't. My suspicion is that the Daredevil was better received than like Iron Fist and Luke Cage. My feeling is that because Marvel is rolling out or Disney is rolling out its streaming services, that we're probably going to see the Daredevil TV show somewhere else. My guess is that we're going to see it on on that streaming service. My feeling is that The Punisher, which is I think really good, and Jessica Jones season 1 was really good. We're going to see what happens with them after their next season, but you very well could see those 3 move over to Disney streaming service. But only time will tell whether that's going to happen or not. Disney only cares about Marvel Studios. Yeah, but you know, the source material comes from the comics, right? So, and again, sometimes companies will take a loss leader just because it's not that significant. So I am way behind here on the comments. I want to try to catch my comic book gallery says Iron Fist was garbage. You, sir, are correct. Disney doesn't want mature stuff on their streaming services. I don't know. We're gonna have to see. Again, you could be right about that. But again, that show was incredibly popular, and so the question is that show really dead, or was that show pulled by Disney by Marvel? Because isn't Kevin Feige starting his new TV division on Disney? So I don't know how that's all going to work out. I don't know how that's going to work out. Dark Hawk does have a posse now. He definitely has a posse now. Don't be surprised if Daredevil gets a film. Electric, Kingpin. I could see that, JD, all the way. That last season of Daredevil, bro, was incredible. It really was good. So D'Onofrio, I am a huge fan of, and I've been a huge fan of his since Law and Order. So I love to see him in Daredevil. I think he did a really good job. Gilbert Ross, how you doing, brother? Welcome to the chat. Hopefully you subscribe as well, but definitely want to welcome you to the chat. Defender, we got a comment here that Defenders was a great show. It was pretty good. I think Defenders was probably better, in my opinion, than the last season of Iron Fist. No, the first season of Iron Fist, and probably the second half of Luke Cage. Because there were, I think that Luke Cage went a little too long. It went probably like 3 or 4 episodes too long, and I kind of lost interest in it. So Tracy says, I worry about collecting as a hobby in the long term. Millennials don't collect as much as today. They don't want to haul boxes of books around all their lives and want to watch or stream movies instead. Could be. I don't know. One of the things that I've been looking for is I want to try to find some demographic information that actually looks at the age of comic book readers. And I've been unable to find anything that provides demographic information, because everything that I really have is like anecdotal, or it is extremely old. And so there was one link that someone sent me where this reporter had actually looked at Facebook and mined Facebook to try to identify what was happening demographically from comic book readers. And the problem with that, well, there's a couple of problems, is that Facebook in 2011, even more so now, is heavily skewed towards an older population. So by mining that data and saying that the population of the average comic book reader is getting old is inherently flawed, because the data to begin with is skewed towards the older population. So for example, I'm kind of making this up because I can't remember all the numbers, that there were 50 million 18 to 23 year olds, but there were also 50 million 65 and older people, right? So those two things kind of offset. And then if you look at what was happening in between, it was also skewed older, right? And so, but they didn't have any data less than 18. So it just skews the data. But what I do want to try to find is some demographic information that actually helps us to better understand beyond the anecdotal, what is happening with the average reader of comics, because people say, you know, millennials and others are not reading comics, and I want to believe that to be true, but I also am a fan of like having some hard data, and so it would be nice to know that, to be able to make some informed kind of comments about that. To get up living the clown, I have a lot to say. Been collecting for, Whitewell says he's been collecting for almost 30 years. He can't remember a better time for the quality of storytelling except Valiant. Again, I think that the storytelling right now is pretty solid. I've been watching Comics Explained, and he's been talking about the Jonathan Hickman, I think that's his last name, Jonathan Hickman's run on Fantastic Four. And I may have to buy that whole thing, because this dude told the story. It's probably like over 2 hours of video that I've been listening to him talk about this run, and I am just riveted that I just want to buy the run and read it, because I think that there's some incredible writing by Jonathan. So I may have to check that out, you know. And what I think and here Whitewell saying Hickman's FF is so good. So one of the other things that I think to some degree or another inspires me when we talk about age is you look at like guys like John's Comics with Kids. You look at man, what is his name? He's a New Orleans fan. I can't think of his name, but there's a couple of guys on here that actually buy comics for their kids, and they encourage their kids to read comics. And I wonder if there are more people out there that are doing that than we actually know of, right? That are having their kids read comics, that are exposing their kids to comics that we don't know about because we have no data to pull from it. And so I know people are wondering and worried about the skewing of the comic book reader population towards the older without younger people getting into it. But then I'm invigorated when I see John's Comics with Kids sit there on Saturday mornings at 8 o'clock while I'm having my coffee, holding my daughter with his two kids, talking about comics. You know, I find it hard to believe that he is the only one that is out there doing that. So I don't know. Ben just got here, Tech 31. Lots of collectors born into the 80s and 90s have their jobs and careers and are boosting the fair market value. Plus, these folks grew up watching lots of X-Men cartoons and tend to be big Wolverine fans. Well said. I mean, you could say the same thing to some degree or another about other generations as they moved into their 30s, 40s, and have more discretionary income. You tend to see whatever that thing is that they are all interested in actually go up. I think that kind of happens with like cars to some degree or another. And so I don't know. Only time will tell. Kyle says, even with myself just starting to collect, my 2-year-old thinks she's Supergirl just by showing her a few Spider-Man comics. My boy loves Spider-Man. He comes in and he counts the Spider-Man on the wall here every time he's in the room. It doesn't change, but he counts them every day, and he wears his little Spider-Man mask. And so, yeah, I want to remain more hopeful and positive that this hobby isn't going to die with us. Right? My hope is that the next generation will see some value in these things. And I look at guys like DS Comics, right? DS Comics is a young dude. He reads more pre-Cold horror than he does anything else, right? Like, Again, I find it hard to believe that he's the only one that's interested in pre-cold horror. And so my point is, you never know where someone's interests and passions are going to lie. You know, you have to see kind of where it goes, you know. Thanato says he would love Action Comics 252. I did a video right after. We'll go back to printing comics on newspaper, charge $2 so little kids can actually afford them. Well said. And I think where we're headed right now, man, is I think comics are about to go up to, what is it, $4.99? I think they've been playing around with that. So I think prices are going up. But, you know, the other thing that I think about, to be honest with you, is what in this world is actually getting cheaper. Right? I remember when, you know, comics used to be 75 cents and then $1 and then $1.25 and then $1.50. I remember when I could get a haircut when I had hair for $7, right? I paid $20 plus tip to get my 4-year-old's haircut, right? The prices of everything are going up. And will people still buy comics, new comics, because the prices are $5? Probably. Are people maybe going to be more selective in what they buy? Absolutely. I don't think, you know, if at $5 a pop, I don't know, people are going to buy all 8 variants or 20 variants for issue number 1, right? I think that maybe people will be a little bit more choosy in how they spend their money as prices go up. So, but only time will tell. Chad Lee says pre-cold horror is his stuff, his jam. Let's put it that way. So yeah, I think, what is this? Tech 31 Kid says 5 game changers in the comic market since the 70s. OSPQ, Gerber Photo Journal, eBay online sales, CGC, MCU. Well said. I don't know what OSBQ, Overstreet Price Guide. Thank you. I just got it. No, I think you may be onto something. Oh, my man, Comic of Knights of Old is in the house. Knights of Old has saved me. He came through big time for me. I put out a post the other day looking for some help with some people that had the Overstreet guide. He came to my rescue, hooked me up with some awesome data that I am now turning into a, hopefully, fingers crossed, awesome video. So more to come on that. But Knights of Old, thank you, brother, for hooking me up with that. I absolutely appreciate you. So, Bake the Snake says he is 36 and got back into collecting after 6 to 7 months ago. I think many of us here have jumped back into comics as of, you know, late. So used to be 50 cents to cross the Bay Bridge. No, brother, it's what is it now? Like 5? I think I pay 5 every day, 8 or something like that. It's a crazy amount of money. But the thing is that nothing is getting cheaper. Everything is getting more expensive. And so I don't know that comics going up to $5 a pop will be the death nail for comics, right? This Green Lantern was $4.99. I don't know if this is going to be the death nail of comics, right? And again, where this whole conversation came from was this idea that the comic market is going to collapse. And so part of my thinking is that even if the new comic book market collapses, right, that being the primary market, could it have some effects on the secondary market, which is the one that most of us deal in, right? If you're talking about these books on the wall, your Silver Age, your Golden Age, even your Bronze Age books, that's a secondary market thing that has nothing to some degree to do with the primary market. I think that the demand for these books will continue regardless of what happens in the primary market. Now, it could have some impact. Things could stall, prices could settle down, inventory could dry up a little bit, but I don't think if DC and Marvel went out of business, I don't know that Hulk 1, Amazing Fantasy 15, I don't know that those books suddenly go to zero, right? I don't think that it's going to work that way. At least I hope that it doesn't, because I'm going to have a lot of worthless paper in my room. Is X-Men, which one? X-Men were $7.99. Which one are you talking about? The newest ones? The newest one? The price is a problem. Just got back into the game a couple of months ago. Reggie, good channel. Thank you, Ruben. I appreciate that, brother. You know, the whole thing about it, man, is I was new to this thing again not that long ago. And so, you know, just trying to give back to the community. DS Comics says it's all about supply and demand. If they print 200,000 copies and demand goes down, that means the value goes down. Well said. But I think what's great is that even when you look at some of the best selling comics on a monthly basis, right? The best-selling comics, the number one out of 500 comics sold in a given month, they are still only printing like 100,000 of them, right? Only like 100,000 of them, right? And if you look at the top 500 comics that are sold, that it's 8 million comics. In 1993, in 1 month, the month of April, I think, 43 million comics were printed. Right? 43 million comics were sold to local comic shops. The question that Kingpin Comics asked is, if that's how many were sold, how many were printed, right? Because that's a legitimate question, right? Because you have to think, sometimes they overprint, sometimes books are damaged and they have to, send them out a new sample or whatever. The question is, if you printed and sold 43 million, how many extra did you print, right? That's even the case now where you're printing 8 million in the top 500 books. The question is, how many are being printed? I don't know that anyone knows that. And then Ben says here, the big keys are somewhat immune to changes in the current/modern market. Not 100% immune, but an AF-15 is not going to be a thought. Well said, brother, right? And this is a very important point. Is that what happens in the primary market doesn't collapse the secondary or the tertiary markets, right? It's going to have some impact, right? But demand for AF-15, demand for Brave and the Bold 28, for Showcase 22, you guys are impressed that I know these numbers, right? that suddenly the market is not going to dry up for those books. You and I are still going to want those books regardless of what happens in this other market, So I just think I think that's important. Oh, baseball cards are done. Do you think Tony has a question here? Do I think people will stop getting their comics graded? So a couple of comments here, and I thank you for making that point. So I had another note here, and I said, so let's say that the market crashes. What happens to retailers, right? And here are my thoughts. I put a note here that local and virtual comic shops could go out of business. I could see that happening, right? Because I could see it happening, but I think that there will be some survival of the fittest. And here's what I mean by that. I think that some comic shops have learned their lesson from the 90s. And what I mean is that I think that many of them have diversified their offerings. So what surprised me when I returned back to comics is when I went into shops, I wasn't seeing as many back issues as I used to see back in the day, right? In a comic shop, at least from what I've seen, very rarely is just a comic shop. Right? Oftentimes these comic shops have diversified their offerings in that they're offering like toys, these Funko Pops, these Thanos gloves, some of them have cards, some of them have gaming nights. I think that many of them have diversified their offerings, which allow them to weather the storm a little bit better than maybe comic book stores back in the day that only did comics, right? And were surviving off of the new comic books and trying to eke out a living on those long boxes. I think that things look a little bit different, but I think you could see some closures. You could see some virtual shops and some local comic shops close down. There's no doubt about that. What you could also see from these retailers are probably going to be some steep discounts, right? They're going to start cutting some prices. They're going to start, giving some stuff away almost for free to kind of entice people to stay afloat. Like Midtown Comics, not to say that they're in trouble, they do sales, 20% off back issues and stuff like that. So you could see more of that stuff. Could I see the third-party grading services having some issues? My answer is yes. That was something that I thought about. And my thought was that you could lose maybe one of the grading companies, right? Because you have CBCS, who now is backed up by Beckett, right? So just like Marvel, they have that big brother with the deep pockets, right? But you could see some of the other companies, and I don't know which one, right? I'm kind of like making this up, right? They they could start to have some financial problems, right? In the sense that people aren't sending their books in as much as they were because the market is dried up. Now you have to think, if new comic books take a dip, part of what would dip there would be the speculators that buy the new comics, that send them in to get graded and turn around and flip them for a profit. That would essentially dry up because that market has gone away. And so could the others survive just off of people like us sending in some of these Silver Age, Bronze Age books? I don't know. Would we send in as many books to be graded, especially when you're talking about CG's cost at $32? I don't know, right? Would CGC respond to this by offering discounts, free memberships, lowering their prices, doing some kind of multi-book discount in order to stay afloat? They could, right? I think that if it gets really bad, they may either try to buckle down and weather the storm, or they could take some action to keep the ship afloat. Now, again, in my opinion, the comic book market is just like any other market, right? The markets are cyclical, right? If they have a crash and they take a dip, I firmly believe that they will rebound in time. And the question becomes, what amount of time, right? Who knows? Who knows? But I do think that some of these grading companies could take a financial hit. Absolutely. Big Will, you thought what in the 90s? I missed the first part of it. Knights of Old says, the best part about right now is the movies give us a forward-facing optimism and excitement about the future that was gone from the mid-90s till the MCU. Well said, well said. Ben says, I believe CBCS was having some financial trouble, thus prompting them to partner with Beckett and moving to Dallas. You could be right about that. You could be right about that. That's why they decided to sell and actually be bought out. I think you could be right on that. Ben says every book has its time in the sunlight, hopefully not to damage it too much. But I think you're right? I mean, these companies, depends upon people sending books in order to keep their business afloat, right? And even if they offer all these other services and things like that, if the book doesn't go in, it can't be pressed, it can't be cleaned, it can't be verified in order for them to make some of that other money. So G says he would be happy with no grading services, or he would grade him, he would buy his own slab. I think I got that. Big Will, I still don't see your comment here. As long as you don't kill the Wall Street was a documentary, we thought we'd be fine. Yeah. So I think all of this stuff is interesting. I think it's all speculation. And this whole thing really just comes out of the various videos that I've been putting up as of late, and me just having lots of conversations with people. So, this whole thing has just been kind of fun. One of the things that I've also been kind of thinking about is what is going to determine the value of future comics? And here's what I mean. If you look at old comics, part of what makes them special is a little bit of the rarity, right? Back in the day, kids read comics, they dogged the comics out. A lot of the comics that were printed, well, first, the print quantities were lower, right? And I'm talking like back in the day, were lower. And then you had kids that didn't necessarily treat these books like treasures, right? They were paperbacks, they were periodicals, right? They didn't necessarily treasure them. Fast forward to where we are now, where we are slabbing and we're mylighting and we're, plastic sleeving and backing, boarding, everything. Every single book is in pristine condition, right? If you get a new book now, your book better be a 9.8 because anything else is worthless, right? So if we are printing fair amounts of books, and if every book is treated like $1 million piece of art, what is going to be the determinant as to whether that book is worth something in the future, right? Because if you print 50,000 of a book and let's just say, 40,000 of them are still around as 9.8s, is that book worth something? That's the kind of thing that I'm starting to play around right now is what happens with some of that? What happens with these future books? are they going to be worth as much as the books now because they won't be as scarce or as rare? Children's nostalgia from the MCU once they have disposable income is the only potential for future. There you go. That's a great point right there, is that, you know, I watched some guy's video earlier today and he was talking about how he used to watch Spider-Man back in the day on, like, I guess like PBS or something like that. And that's why he really was like a huge Spider-Man fan. And that's what drove him to buy, you know, Amazing Spider-Man 1 or Amazing Fantasy 1. So it was that feeling of nostalgia. And I think, you know, going back to one of my earlier points, if we continue to expose our children to comics, then they will have that sense of nostalgia when they get a little older, and maybe they will continue buying. Most superhero books are not worth anything ever. Well said, Pope. That is well said. That is well. There we go. Electric Company Spider-Man. There you go. Morgan Freeman as the narrator. But yeah, he basically spoke about this sense of nostalgia. And it was a 30-minute video that I watched because this guy just told the most amazing story about Spider-Man. So, but yeah, so I don't. But again, you know, Gray Matter Hulk here is talking about that's why the 1 in 200 variants are so high, because they are limited. But again, you know, if you let's just say that it's 1 in 200 and you pay, and I'm making this up, $1,000 for it. Is that book simply because it was a 1 in 200 variant, and because you paid $1,000 for it, is it automatically going to be worth something in the future? I don't know. Like, to someone's point, the vast majority of books that are printed aren't really worth anything, you know? So I don't know if we can use the super rare variants as the benchmark to determine future value, you know? And again, what I'm doing right now is I'm actually mapping out 10 different Golden Age, Silver Age, Bronze Age books over time. And I'm mapping them out because I want to see like what happened with the prices of these books over a very long period of time, because there may be some interesting patterns. I don't know if these are going to be patterns that will predict future behavior of comics. But it's going to be interesting to kind of look to see what the data says. But I'm hoping to be able to get that video out to you guys next week. So hopefully you guys will get a chance to check that video out. So Electric Company, Spider-Man shooting the rope web. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, and I think the ratio variance I can do without. You know, what I'm trying to do as a comic book reader, you know, someone who still buys new comics. I actually speak with my dollar, and I don't buy those variants. That's how I kind of address it. So Whitewell says he has Generation X 1 in 1,000. That's not worth diddly squat. It's a very good point. Like, I don't know if I don't know what the determining factor for future value will be for the books that are coming out now. And I don't know if it's the rarity of the actual rarity of the book. I don't know if it's going to be the condition of the book. I don't know what the deciding factor will be. I really don't. And that's something, and I'm not struggling with it, but that's just something that's kind of in the back of my mind. And Double S Comic Reader, no, I am not related to Richard Simmons or Gene Simmons. Tech says, I used to try and buy every #1 on the racks because back in the day, kid really thought they would have value later. My Alpha Flight #1, the Alpha Flight with the yellow cover, got one of those back there, brother. That is not worth anything, right? You know, for me, I think what I try to do is, and I do it to a limited degree, is buying #1s. Even now, I think it's a waste of time, right? Because I think they've gotten wise to this idea that we all buy #1s, so they don't put anything in the #1. Like, nothing goes in the #1, right? It's the later issues that they actually, where they need to keep sales going, that they put some of these new characters. So buying the #1s is not the way to go. So, but maybe buying the first appearances of Silver Age characters, I think might not be a bad way to go. And my thought is that the MCU always has a way of surprising us by throwing in characters that you don't necessarily anticipate. And so that's kind of one of the things that I've been playing around with. AF15, #1, Raw 9.8, I will take that. Whitewell says Alpha Flight is hype. It is hype but worthless, brother. Double S Comic says, which comic book is valuable to me? You know, I'm a big fan of, honestly, I buy what interests me and I buy what I want to read. And the vast majority of what I buy, I actually do read, you know. So if it's Spider-Man stuff all day long, you know, series 1 Spider-Man stuff, I am all about that. X-Men, all about that. Even the issues that aren't worth anything, I still want them because I'm passionate about, you know, Spider-Man and X-Men. So to me, those are the books that are definitely worth something. And then, like the new books that come out, I buy the new Avengers, I buy the new Fantastic Four, I buy the new Spider-Man. Might they be worth nothing? Yeah. Are they good stories? In many cases, like I just read this thing, this Carnage book. Whew, this Carnage book is good. The Carnage book is solid. I haven't read this one, but I'm looking forward to reading this one. This series has been really good, so I'm definitely digging that. The new FF was a little bit of a disappointment. I didn't enjoy it as much as I thought that I would. The new X-Men, which I just started reading, is okay, not great. But I still read new comics, and I read them because I enjoy them. You know, I at the same time as I'm reading hard copies of these, I'm actually reading digital copies of Amazing Spider-Man and Fantastic Four. I'm reading a lot of the old stuff digitally and the new stuff as paper. So I do a little bit of everything because I still just enjoy stuff. DS Comics says he thinks that ASM 101 is undervalued right now. So is Strange Tales 110. AF1 is a great book to own regardless of the value. Absolutely with that. There's a lot of really, really good books out there, you know. And I would agree with Pope that ASM 101 is definitely pricey right now, but it could be undervalued. Ben says, who are my 3 favorite mutants? Man, that's a good question. I haven't thought about that. So I would have to say Wolverine for sure. I am a fan of Gambit. I've always kind of liked Gambit. So I would have to say Gambit. Number 3, who would I pick for my 3rd favorite mutant? I'm trying to think. I don't think there's anybody else on the X-Men roster that I would roll with. One character that I always liked as a kid, and I don't know why, was Forge. I always liked Forge, and I don't know why. I don't know why. I'm starting to be a bigger fan of like Franklin Richards. I'm starting to really like enjoy Franklin Richards and his power set. I'm kind of digging that. I may want to go back and get like his first appearance. But I would have to say that maybe those are my 3. No, Rogue is just hot. I mean, she's just hot. But her powers, her inability to touch people, that's not hot. That's not sexy. So, all right, let me see. Boy Who Had 7, how you doing, brother? Welcome to the chat. So I would probably, Ben, I have to say that those are probably some of my more favorite characters right there. Wolverine is definitely high on the list. So Fantastic Four annual. Yeah, I know, JD. I know. I actually need to get it, man. I just haven't. Let me write that down. I typically keep a board of over here of all the books that I want to track down. And I've been watching Comics Explained, and he's been talking about Jonathan Hickman's run of Fantastic Four. And I've just been blown away by that story, blown away by Franklin Richards. The stuff that he was doing in the new Fantastic Four number 2 really captured my attention. So that was really cool. And so he's a fascinating character, right? His ability to keep everybody in the MCU young because of his time warping or his reality warping capabilities. I just find all of that stuff fascinating. And I just think Gambit is just cool from like back in the day, man. Back in the day in the 90s with the cartoon, Gambit was the man. I actually have a toy downstairs under the house is a Gambit figure that I've had all these years since I was like a teen. I am a fan of Gambit, so that'd probably be my list. All right, so I want to wrap up here. I want to get myself to the gym. I need to go train some chesticles. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. It was a little less structured than a lot of the stuff that I do. But again, this was like a what if video of what happens if the market crashes. And so I didn't want it to make it this formal thing because it's all speculation and who the heck knows. I just wanted to kind of be a little bit of a free-flowing thing. One of the things that somebody threw out at me recently, and I'll get you guys' opinion of it. Yes, chesticles is a real thing. It is a actual body part. Chesticles, look it up. Somebody recommended to me that I consider doing like a question and answer night, like on maybe a weekly basis or bi-weekly basis or something like that. I think people somewhat enjoy some of the more free-flowing things that I do, in addition to like the much more structured stuff that I do. So if that's something that you guys might be interested in, where we just get on here and we just chat about random stuff, if that's something that you guys are interested in, I am definitely all ears on that. So with that, I am actually going to wrap this thing up. If you guys get a chance, remember, I am having a trivia night on this coming Sunday, probably around 7:30 Pacific time. So if you guys can join me for that, we are going to be giving away some pretty cool comics. I need to work on my, yes, it is chest. Chesticles is me being funny, and it is the pecs, the pectoral muscles. Chest day, chesticles. You guys are nuts. But hopefully, again, you guys can join me for trivia night. We're going to be giving away some really cool stuff. The family has donated a healthy number of books that we'll be giving away. I showed the comic books at the beginning of this video, so if you join late, you may want to go back and watch the beginning so you can see exactly what's going to be given away. But again, I want to thank you guys for hanging out. Chesticles were what Rob Liefeld drew for Captain America that one time. If you remember that side pose that he had with Captain America, those are chesticles. Those are what every man aspires to have. Anyway, I want to thank you guys for hanging out with me. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this, and if you get a chance, give the video a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, I definitely recommend that because we have some really cool stuff coming out. Take care.